data by way of the calculations. I just do not know how to repeat the calculation process anymore. It is only clear to me that I didn't simply receive the data from somewhere or from outside, rather, I calculated them. But the how, I don't know that anymore. Patar says I agree with Quetzal says everything is simply phenomenal. Billy says I would still have a few more questions. Is it right that the absolute hyperlight constant lies at a value of 10,7,000, as Farth once explained this to me? Quetzal says that is of correctness. At the same time, it concerns the constant in the space of the absolutum of creation, so the highest speed of creation and the creation's expansion rate at the origin. Billy says thanks, that is clear to me. Is it also true now, as I have calculated, that the great time, in the most exact calculation, amounts to 311,39,999,999,960 years, and that the universe only expands during 155,519,999,999,980 years, and then falls into a contraction speed, which causes a fallback with a declining speed in the constant half-lives, like in the case of the building up, until the maximum speed of the original preceding light constant of 44,069,497.5 kilometers per second is reached again? If that is true, then a great time comprises 49 half-lives during 6,347,755,102,040 years, in which case, then, at 1/2 of the total, so at 24.5 half-lives, the change from becoming to passing takes place, or just the change from expansion to contraction. This would mean, then, that within the context of the creation's evolution, everything created by it during this fallback could still develop to perfection, whereby no iota of that which is created by it would be eliminated. Quetzal says that, too, is of correctness. Billy says good, then still these questions. Can you explain to me what diameter in light years the creation had exactly at the time of its first expansion process at the origin, and whether universal space must be measured in a straight line or in a curve? Patar says haven't you also calculated that? Billy says no, I didn't know how I should do that. Quetzal says on one side, the expansion of the creation amounted to 14 vigintillion, translator's note of 14 followed by 63 zeros light years. This expansion must be multiplied twice for half of space and multiplied 4 times for all of space. The distances in universal space must be measured in a curve because there is no straight line. Billy says aha, I thought that myself. So then theoretically, the universe could be measured in a middle straight line in such a way that 28 vigintillion light-years count as a central starting point, where to the distance in light-years of the previously completed expansion would then still come. Is that right? Quetzal says that is of correctness. Billy says so it is, therefore, also true that the expansion of the universe takes place all-dimensionally and spirally, where the shape, then, resembles a somewhat round egg. Quetzal says also that is of correctness. Billy says good, then still one last question relating to this. If the initial expansion rate was 44,069,497.5 kilometers per second, then at the same time, it concerns the constant of immaterial energy. Consequently, this would have to be consistent for the time of existence of the universe. But on the other hand, the spiritual thoughts of human beings would also have to move at this speed throughout this entire great time, so at 147 times the speed of light, if I calculate this according to today's light constant, where the material thoughts of the material consciousness reach, at most, simply the speed of light. Only applies to normal space but not to paraspace, in which the speed is indefinite, therefore equals 10,7,000 light equals 10,7,000 x 299,792.5 kilometers/sec. Quetzal says there is probably nothing more at all that remains hidden to you. Your explanations are just as accurate as all explanations before. What other things have you still gotten to know? Billy says nothing more, at least not definitively. But tell me, can one make my calculations and results accessible to the earthly public? Quetzal says nothing speaks against that, only you certainly have to take into account that you will be insulted, as usual, as a liar and fantasist, because earthly science is still a long way from becoming understanding of the truth, even only approximately. It is still moving, as you know, on very limited tracks, from which the scientists are very faint-hearted and create small material calculations about the existence, the development, and the width and expansion of the universe. Billy says that doesn't matter to me because I have long been used to the making bad of my person. But now, I would still have some other questions if you have time. Semyaza says sure, just ask. It is a great joy for me just to be able to be together with you today. By the way, Quetzal still wants to connect you to his device before you go again. You seem to need it most urgently. Billy says that is possible. It isn't going particularly well for me. At the same time, I just think that everything has no great meaning anymore. Somehow, I feel this. Semyaza says I know, because everything is only a postponement, which is why I myself very often feel sad. Billy says you shouldn't do that because one shouldn't worry too much about what cannot be changed. Semyaza says you say that so easily. Billy says of course, what else should I do? But let's leave that. Can you tell me, perhaps, how many things of Eric Van Deniken correspond to the correctness and the truth, with regard to his representations and assertions? Maybe you can give me a percentage. Semyaza says sure, I can do that, because in recent times, I have dealt very intensively with these things. His basic statements regarding the intelligences from the depths of universal space and influencing the human beings of Earth are to be confirmed completely. But his statements in reference to many ancient relics of bygone times are, in most cases, based on very extravagant fantasies. Only less than 4% of his statements correspond to reality, as I could determine through the most exact calculations. The man Eric Van Deniken, unfortunately, tends too much to force all ancient finds and everything existing here since time immemorial into the area of extraterrestrial intelligences because he is too caught up in these things and has long lost the clear overview, if he ever possessed this at all, which is doubtful after everything that I analyzed. Billy says well, then you also know what he has written, for example, about the so-called Nazca Plain, which is in Peru, if I am correctly oriented. Semyaza says I know what he reports about that, sure. Billy says okay, and what does it really concern with the alleged air landing signs or airfields, etc.? Semyaza says the productions represent an astrological calendar as well as an astrological garden. At an earlier time, when these grounds were still operating and were used astrologically, the enormous signs were surrounded by gardens, out of which the astrological signs protruded like parkways, etc. They were made by human beings of Earth, and indeed, without any influence from extraterrestrial intelligences. Billy says that answer is enough for me, but I have another question. How many other objects move around Sirius? Semyaza says there are 5 of those. Billy says thanks. Then still a very unusual question. You once told me in confidence that the so-called criminality could be repaired scientifically and medically if this would only be striven for. You told me at that time that some toxin develops in excess in the human being for some reason, which makes him criminal. What is this toxin called and what, then, should be done against it? Semyaza says the toxin is called phenylethylamine. If this is neutralized in the human body, then through this, that substance is made ineffective, which drives the human being to criminality. I may not explain more about that, however. Billy says well, I actually also didn't want to know more. But now, is it possible that I can bring forward some questions of group members? The one would like to know who he was at an earlier time, etc. Quetzal says we have already often stated that we will answer no more questions that are placed by persons other than yourself. Any attempt would also be futile if you would ask these or even such questions as if they were from you. Billy says yes, you have said that several times. It was, indeed, only a vague attempt. Semyaza says sure, that is your style, but in the future, we will truly answer no more questions if these are not in the direct interest of our mission and the group's existence and its direct interests. Billy says well, okay, that is clear to me. Then I have here a letter from Elsie for you, Quetzal. To my knowledge, it contains an important question in reference to the continued existence of the center. Quetzal says let me see it, thanks. Yes, I understand, but I may not and don't want to give an answer to this question. If I would do that, then I would thereby limit the freedom of those who are addressed in this letter. The inheritance issue is to be regulated in such a way as we've worked it out. Nothing further should be done because we may not make determinations for the future and for human beings who have not yet seen the light of the world and with whom we still couldn't talk about these issues and couldn't obtain their consent. We could give the advice of the inheritance transfer, as we have given it in the present case, only because a preview allowed us the possibility of this advice. I won't answer the other questions in Elsie's letter because they are purely personal in nature and because we, as already explained, will no longer answer such questions. The solution of the center's continued existence will be found, as already stated earlier, in a group acquisition, as you already explained. Billy says I did, indeed, say that, and I also accept it. But here, I still have some letters for Semyaza, also from children. I don't think that you should give any response to them, rather, they are simply addressed to you, in order to thank you and to greet you. If you will receive them. Semyaza says sure, I am very happy about this. Pay my dear thanks to the people who wrote these. Billy says one letter is from Vreni, another is from Beat, and one is from Christian. There is also something from Caroline, I think. Semyaza says are those the children of Beat and Vreni? Billy says yes. Semyaza says pay them my very dear thanks and my joy. But I really cannot reply to the letters. Billy says that surely also isn't expected. Certainly, they will also be so happy about the fact that it gives you joy. Semyaza says that is very sweet, and the relations between you all and us seem to me to be almost as they were at an earlier time, before the unfortunate difficulties found their beginning. But it still isn't so far, even though I hope very much that everything will be as affectionate as earlier. Quetzal says we also hope that for all of you and ourselves, but the decision is still pending, which should fall within the first 2 weeks of March. You know what demands are placed, and only with their fulfillment can everything be brought back into normality. In particular, Herbert and H play a certain important role in this, which must find its correctness by the beginning of the month of March. You know that we must place the demand on H that by the beginning of March, he is to be living in the near or immediate vicinity of the center, within a radius of no more than 10 kilometers. The reason for this is so that he finally evolves in certain things, which isn't possible for him, however, without the fulfillment of this demand. For Herbert, the demand is for him to adapt himself, at last, into the group and community in full measure and also to take his duties of meditation seriously. The other still objectionable points with him, as well as with H, will then surrender themselves. If and when that happens, everything can be initiated again in the old ways. On the whole, the other group members have striven so far in the meantime that everything starts off much better, and finally, there is a ray of hope in reference to the continued existence and the progress in the group as well as in reference to the entire work. The progress of the individual group members is remarkable, but it should not and must not be concluded from this that a decline in the efforts could now be allowed. This is also true for Herbert and H particularly. This also means that if H now apparently fits himself into the order, becoming willing to live in the near vicinity of the center, then he cannot cancel his living there at a later point in time. It was already communicated to you confidentially some time ago that if the interests wouldn't start up in an authoritative form, then a specific, special clause would have to be prepared by me, which states that fallible group members, who would have to be excluded during the time of building up, would have to do without all rights, as they are given in the statutes, and would no longer have access to the center or to any interests of the group under any circumstances in their present lives. We must hold to this, unfortunately, but it should still be explained clearly and plainly that such a special clause may only be created by us alone. Billy says these things are clear to me, and despite my reluctance, I also had to present this to the group recently. Semyaza says that was surely of necessity, and in my opinion, it probably would have been better if these issues had been brought up in the reports because very much strain on the nerves would have remained spared to you through this. Billy says partially, you are surely right, but now, I have the matter behind me, yes. Look here you have a copy of Life and Death, and of The Law of Love. Semyaza says thank you very much. Quetzal says concerning the writings, I have to tell you that in the meantime, it has become of necessity that you compose a writing that is directed against the use of nuclear power. Billy says that is a concern again, my son. Nevertheless, I'm not a nuclear physicist, and I don't exactly understand a lot about these things. On the other hand, I have enough work with the drawing up of the spiritual teaching and with many other tasks. Quetzal says you know how your time begins to press and that you, therefore, still have to do some more. I am sorry that I have to tell you this because I know only too well how ill you are in truth. But there is no other option for me. Billy says all right, my son, I myself know how right you are. Then I'll just wedge myself behind this area and see to it that I bring something useful to such a writing. Quetzal says unfortunately, no one can be found on earth who could relieve you of this work. I have endeavored myself around it, but all my attempts failed. Billy says don't worry about it, I'll take over the work soon. It's apparently urgent. Quetzal says that is of correctness, because things have arisen again in recent times, which require a suitable writing and which should find a global distribution as soon as possible. Billy says okay, I'm already thinking about how I should write it. But now, I would once again have a somewhat unusual question. Can you tell me how much oxygen a full-grown tree actually supplies and how many young trees are needed to replace a full-grown tree in its oxygen production? Semyaza says this question falls into the area of one of my professions, and therefore, I can answer it for you. A full-grown coniferous tree of the fir kind produces a quantity of oxygen every 24 hours that is needed for 12 adult human beings to live and breathe. For the second question, if you make a comparison with an oak tree of 100 years of age, then 2,563 young trees of the same kind are needed to produce as much oxygen as the full-grown tree. Billy says thanks, that's enough for me. Yes, those were, in fact, the questions that I had in stock for today. Patar says then we should end our conversation for today. Billy says as you wish. So, once again, quite loving and cordial thanks for your visit, and please, also greet the others for me and thank them for me. It made me very happy to see you again. Quetzal says not so fast, my friend. I first have to do some things with you because you truly look very ill and worn out. Come here, then we can begin. Translator's note: the following is an article written by Calliope Meier, which is included at the end of Contact Report 119 in the German version of the Pleiadian/Pleiaren Contact Reports. End of the note. Brief encounter with Patar. Hinterschmidruti, February 4, 1979. It was yesterday, Billy's birthday, the 3rd of February, 1979, when I, Calliope Meier, at around 2:30 p.m. was coming from the kitchen into our living room because I wanted to get something there. Opening the door, I took my first step into the room. As I stood there startled, for at the rear living room exit there stood a large male figure, who was dressed in a strange grey suit, a kind of overall, which had a large, round opening in the neck, which evidently served for a helmet, which the man wasn't wearing. However, all around the belt, some strange things were attached. Evidently startled himself, the bearded man looked at me for a second, then took a step backwards and grasped with his left hand onto a small device on his belt, upon which he simply dissolved, from one split second to another, into nothing. He just disappeared without trace, and indeed, without a sound. Still standing there startled, wild thoughts shot through my head, before it became clear to me that the man, at whom I had stared for about 15 seconds, could have been no one other than Patar, the extraterrestrial friend of Billy. Billy's description of this man, at any rate, fit very exactly to the figure in the living room. And that it had actually been Patar, he confirmed this to Billy still on the same day, for at 2:46 p.m., so about 15 minutes after the incident, the 119th contact took place, at which, as Billy explained, Patar told him that he had looked for him in the living room and in the bedroom, where Billy was minutes before Patar made his appearance, and where he actually still was, but then he went outside through the bedroom passageways outside door, in order to go to the garage, where he settled something. Then, after that, the contact took place. Poppy Calliope Meier Zafaru. Signed K. Meier. The end.